Hello and welcome, Nicole here. I am so glad to be crafting with you today. This project is a gorgeous Day of the Dead home decor piece that is really not difficult to make. I'm going to show you step by step and we'll break it down and you can create something just as awesome too. For our first step, we're going to be watercoloring this beautiful sugar skull printable. I have it on some watercolor paper here and we'll be using Memento inks in Bahama Blue, Tangelo, Tuxedo Black, Lilac, and Pear Tart. So I'm going to start with the black because that is the majority of the color I'll be using on this printable. Now I've printed this out on some 140-pound watercolor paper. I did print it through my laser printer, and now I'm going into my black ink. And I love using Memento Black for this because it doesn't break up. A lot of times when you use black inks, dye inks, they like to break up into its constituent colors, so like purples and greens and browns. Memento Black doesn't do that. So this is a super watercolor friendly medium. And I'm going to go ahead and speed this up a little bit here because there's a lot of ground to cover here. There's a lot of black going on. I've watered it down quite a bit for her hair, and I'm working in some shadows in the background, and you can see that I've really covered in her face to make it sink in and really look like a skull. So for the second part here, I've come in with all of the different colors and I'm starting to work on all of the different areas that I'm going to color. There's not a lot to do here, so I'm using a very small brush, but I can get all of the detail that I'm looking for. So with the flowers, I started off with the lilac posy and I let that dry a little bit, and now you can see I've come back in with the tangelo, and I want to get that pretty dark. So I'm coming back in, getting that a little bit darker, and then I'm going to go back over that with the lilac posies just to let that bleed out and really blend in together. That's probably the most difficult part of this entire piece. Then I'm just going to come back with these different colors and fill in all those little tiny decorations on the skull. That's really going to make this pop. So little bits of green, little bits of the tangelo, and the Bahama Blue really is just reserved for the gem on her forehead and her eyes. Now that I have that all done, I'm going to be taking my Versa marker and doing some selective embossing. So it's really important to get a lot of embossing anti-static powder on the design because it might still be a little bit wet and I don't want the embossing powder to stick. So the Versa marker has both a brush end and a bullet end, and I'm going to be using the bullet tip just to get the detail in the deep recesses of her hair. So I really just want the hair area to sparkle a little bit, and I'm going right into all of those recesses and adding in the Versa marker. Versa marker is just embossing ink in a marker format, and so it allows you to selectively decide where you'd like your embossing powder to go. And once you've put it on there, it doesn't dry right away, so you can go over your whole project and then come back and do your embossing all at once. So now I have my embossing, and this is the New Year's Eve embossing powder. So it has gold and black in it, and it really is stunning. So I'm just adding that onto my project and tapping off the excess, and you can see exactly where that embossing powder is going to stick, and I'm going to heat that up. All right, so we're moving on to the next part of the project, and I have these chipboard pieces that I've used with my StazOn inks, and these are the new StazOn colors if you haven't seen them yet, and they look really, really amazing even on chipboard, something that's not quite white. So I'm using all 5 colors. I'm using plum, and I'm using cherry blossom, and that even looks good on chipboard. Even though this piece isn't quite dry yet, once it's dry, it will really take on a nice pink color. The next color I used was Scarlet Flame. It's a gorgeous orange and it looks nice and burnt on that chipboard. And then the last color I used was Bordeaux. We'll use the Caribbean green later. So I'm going to show you how I actually got the ink onto the chipboard, and you can see that I'm wearing gloves because I'm getting it all over my hands because I'm just going to smush that chipboard right into the ink pad. This works really great when you are sure that your ink pads are nice and juicy, and you can see all that color that I got on there. And to get into the crevices and the edges, I'm just using a sponge dauber to get into all those little edges with the ink, and then I'll go ahead and set that aside to dry. So next I'm going to work on my chipboard background. This is a thick board tag and I have some vintage paper on it. So I'm taking a stencil, and this is the 50 Shade stencil from Colorful Life Designs, and I'm using the Cherry Blossom ink to just add some extra depth and dimension to this. In the end, you're really not going to see a lot of this pattern in the background, but what you do see, it will make a huge difference. So now I'm finally coming in with that Caribbean green, and I've just shifted my stencil slightly so that way I'm not going over the spots that I just did. And I'm going for some of the smaller circles and then just trying to fill in some of the space around the pink where I think that this is going to look really good. So it's very easy to clean up your stencils once you have that completed. Just use some StazOn cleaner and it'll come right off. So now I'm coming in with my Bordeaux ink, and I'm using the Damask stencil from A Colorful Life Designs and adding in another layer. And this really is going to pop against that black and white background. So now you can see little bits of the Damask look. And then I'm going to come back with that Damask stencil, but I'm going to use something different. This time I have the creative medium in shimmer, and I'm going to add just a little bit of actual texture that you can feel on this piece. And we're going to pop that right over the top. And this is a water soluble medium. So once this is done, I will go ahead and clean up my stencil with water and then get any of the residual color off with some StazOn cleaner. So there we go. Now I have some shimmery damask, and this is just now really starting to take shape with lots and lots of texture. But I'm not quite done yet. I'm going to come back in with another texture paste. This is the creative medium in gold. And I'm going to add in some more of those dots from the 50 Shades stencil. And I don't need a lot of this, and I don't want to put it on very thick. If it goes on too thick, it ends up looking more yellow than gold. So a thin layer is all I really need. And you can see I'm just adding in a little bit here, and I'll find a few more spaces on this tag that I think that it's going to end up showing up and really make a difference in the texture and depth of this project. All right, so now I need to work on some of these elements. My chipboard pieces are dry, and I have some paper flowers that I've done up, and I'm going to add some texture and some distressing and color to all of these. They just look too clean. So you can see that I've got a few of these pieces finished already. They've got some black and some gold on them, and they just look gorgeous. So I'm going to start off with this Irresistible Pico Embellisher, and it is a small tip embellisher that I have in both black and white, and the white is called Wedding Dress. And I'm adding these little dots onto the chipboard pieces to give them some texture and some additional color and interest, so they're not just these plain flowers that are going to end up on this project. So I start with just a few drops of the white, and then I'll come back in and do the black. And it's important to cover up the tip as soon as I'm done. It's got the little needle that goes into the tip to keep it clear for the next use. So I make sure that I always put my lid right back on when I'm done with it. So I'm going to add in a few little dots of black. Because of its really fine precision tip, I can get really, really small dots and embellishments onto my projects. So I really like this product. So now I'm just going to take a minute to set this aside and let it dry, and we'll work on just dressing the rest of these items. All right, so I have some gauze and I have some black thread. I'm going to be using this Studio Glaze to add some distressing to all of these items. And Studio Glaze, even though it says it StazOn, is actually a water-based pigment ink, and it's in a nice liquidy format. I'm going to use some blushers to sponge it on. So I just have these little tiny pieces of sponge, and I add a little bit of the Studio Glaze in jet black. And that's just too clean, that whole flower right there. So I'm going to gently dab it on, and you can see that I can get a nice thin layer, and the purple still shows through from the Bordeaux, and the white bits from the Pico Embellisher really start to take on a little bit more of a gray tone, and they start to look a little bit distressed. And then I'm going to come back in with the gold. Now, my blusher might look dirty, but it's actually clean. I make sure that I wash them up after I'm finished with them. So if they're stained, they still work just fine. The color isn't going to transfer. So I'm adding on some of that gold Studio Glaze, and this is where the magic really happens. So the black is already dry, And now I add on a layer of gold shimmer, and it sticks a little bit to the irresistible material and just makes everything look nice and distressed. So I'm adding that on to the little paper flowers, and then I'm going to go into this gauze. So I'm going direct to the gauze with the black, and we're going to make this look nice and old and grungy, and I'm going to just scrunch it up and make this look like a nice distressed piece of gauze. So there you go. You can see some of the black on there. The rest of it started to fray and look just really grungy, and it's going to look so awesome on our finished product. So I'm doing the same thing with this black thread. It was some thicker thread that I broke out into its separate little strands, and I added some of the gold in there, and I'm just smushing it around. It's going to look really, really awesome. All right, so now I have all of my pieces done, dried, and ready to go. And I like to set up my project dry fit first, and then I take a picture of it with my camera so you can see that here. That way I know exactly how I want to set up everything and glue it all down, and I don't have to worry about lifting things up later or anything like that. I've got a perfect sample, and this works really well, especially when it's my first project or if it's just a single project that I'll be making. So I'm going to start with the gauze. That's going to be our nice backdrop for the sugar skull. And I'm speeding this up a little bit here so we can get through all of the futzing and moving and shifting. And I put a lot of the on-point glue. So now I'll add in my sugar skull, and she is going to fit right off to the side there. And she's actually going to pop off the side of the tag to give us some extra dimension. So I will get her added in, and then you will see that I might have to move that gauze just a little bit. So I can move that around because the glue is still definitely a puddle and definitely wet. So now I can just kind of futz things around and get it all shifted around exactly where I want. And I can even lift up a little bit and add in a piece of that black thread. It just looks so cool coming out of the side there. So then I can go in and start adding in my flower pieces, and I can tuck those behind. Because I didn't use a lot of the foam strips, I've got plenty of room to move things into place. And then I can layer and do all sorts of really creative layouts to make this have lots of texture and depth and dimension. So I'm popping in that second piece of chipboard, and then I'll go in and start putting down some of the small flowers. I already know where I want these to go because I've already dry fitted. So normally I would wait until the end, which is what I did at first. But then because I have a pattern that I'm going on, it's very easy to just start working from left to right and get little sections done at a time instead of trying to do it piece by piece. So now I've got that bottom piece in place, and I need to hold it just for a second so it dries in place. And then I'll add in some more of those small flowers. So basically the bottom of my tag is done at this point, and I'll finish up with the top section here. So another piece of that really awesome thread and another chipboard piece, and I've already added one of those paper flowers to it, so it's a little complete element all on its own. And as you can see, I'm holding down one side while I'm working with one hand on the other side. Sometimes we multitask like that, and it works out just fine. So there you go. I've really almost got this finished. I'm going to go ahead and add in the last little bit. So one more little flower, and then my sentiment that I also added some of that studio glaze to so that it didn't pop out. It was bright white and it really needed to blend in better. So a little bit of the studio glaze on that chipboard sentiment worked just perfect. And I love this sentiment because the Day of the Dead is really about celebrating those that have gone before us and who are truly in our hearts. For the last bit, I decided I needed just a little bit more texture, and I had these green seed beads, and I'm adding them in with a little bit more on-point glue, just a few to add a little bit of sparkle and pizzazz to this project. So there we go, a complete and amazing home decor piece for the Day of the Dead. I really hope that you enjoyed this project and that it gives you an idea of how you can break out a more complex project into something with lots of easy steps to create a beautiful home decor item for your home. Thank you so much for stopping by today. I really do love creating and crafting with you. So if you loved today's project, please give it a thumbs up and leave me a comment below. I'll be back soon with some more amazing projects, but until then, happy crafting.